these are some of the basics of their faith. I'm not going to read these, but I want to just put them on the screen briefly, because I want to make it clear that, one of the big differences between Bruderhof and I would say also the Amish, they're both Anabaptist inspired movements, is that these other movements that I've talked about, if they were enchanted, if they were seeking beloved community, they downplayed, if not eliminated, direct reference to Christianity, particularly, traditional Christianity. Whereas Bruderhof has not. They're very forthright about what they believe. And so if you are going to join the Bruderhof, you need to be comfortable with that. They do, as they say, stem from the Anabaptist tradition. They're open to other people, but they put enough out there about their beliefs, and frankly, their way of life is such that you would have to believe those things in order to join, or you wouldn't want to. Here also from their website, they say, when someone becomes a member, all of their earnings and inheritances are given to the church, and each receives necessities such as food, clothing, and housing. Each of us is accountable to the church community for money we spend. No one member or any one Bruderhof location is richer or poorer than any other. And they say this idea is not theirs, it's how the first Christians lived as described in Acts. Their business is sufficient to maintain their communities, and if they have excess, they will actually give it away. They use the money to pay for things that they can't otherwise do for themselves. Okay. And in the Bruderhof, the men dress in normal but plain modern clothing. Women dress like this. So they typically have bonnets, long skirts, looks hot. And I've always wondered about that, and basically concluded this. and while I'm joking about it, I think it is also a serious point that a lot of the movements that, like, them and the Amish and other Mennonite movements and other Anabaptist movements, to the extent that they're successful, a lot of them are quite distinctive, and a lot of them are distinctive in certain respects, whether it's, riding in buggies and wearing a certain kind of very old-fashioned dress, male-female inequality, and rigid gender roles and things like that. It does attract a certain type of person, and I think that's why it has been successful, is that there are people in the world who want to live that way, men and women who want to live that way. So I'm not saying that the women there are being, somehow forced to do so, but it's probably not going to include most of us. So
Lori,
they're sort of self-limiting. Yeah.
Can you tell us why the women are dressed that way, the Bruderhof?
Okay, so the Bruderhof women are dressed that way partly, and this is what I got from, like actual Bruderhof sources, partly because they do not want to tempt men. So that's a part of it. And then the other thing that I've read is that they want to downplay kind of like the uniqueness and the materialism that tends to be kind of rampant in our society. But the sort of desexualizing of women is a part of this. And I think this is why men get more leniency, because there's this mentality that, and there's probably some biological truth to this, but this is something that adult human beings ought to overcome. But there's sort of a notion here that men have a harder time controlling their sexual impulses than women, so women need to help them out. Okay, did I answer the question? Is that?
No, I think you did. It's an interesting, yeah. Men are the corrosive element. We need women to save us, is the idea here.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. So I think that, my response to that is that we need to grow up. And while nobody ought to probably dress provocatively, as in like super sexy, that's usually considered kind of gauche for a reason, whether it's done by a man or a woman. This differentiation says men cannot deal with self-control very well, so they need women to help them out. And I think that we ought to ask more, and I think most men are quite capable of that. I have seen lots of evidence of that, and I'm going to stand by that. So I think it's unnecessary, and it puts off most of us who live in the modern world. We just are not going to be able to do that, even though in a lot of ways, some of the other things that they do and believe I could be attracted to. So just a few lessons, and then I'll stop because I know we're at time sort of here. So some lessons that I drew, like all of these post-industrial revolution communities have relied upon capitalism. Even the Bruderhof, they're selling toys, they're selling equipment. The previous movements, they made things, they sold the arts and crafts. In even Owens, they were actually they were trying to like take care of themselves, but they were also kind of a company town in a way, selling things to other people. But this is partly why we cannot simply emulate these movements. Capitalism is destroying our habitat. So it really is important to be able to say, we may have to like cooperate with it because at this point we can't survive without it. But I don't know, I think we ought to be very conscious about that when we do so, and realize that it is not good enough to just sort of like parasitically glom onto the wealthy expenditures of donors and arts and crafts buyers. I'm often very blunt, so as part of both my strengths as well as my weaknesses. All were or are exclusive in some way, and that's an attraction, whether it's exclusive, say, because of the faith, or because it only attracts a certain type of person like artists and intellectuals, or a particular race or something like that. But that again means that they won't have much societal impact beyond small groups of people who want to live together. Okay, if you can't bring in more people, then it's a self-limiting movement. But we need one that can fix more of our problems, because we've got big problems. The successful ones, in looking at Bruderhof, and also we didn't look at the Amish, and Catholic Worker would be an exception to this, I think, to a great extent. But they tend to be male-led and racially homogenous. Okay. And again, while that may be a fact, it doesn't seem too practical, again, for spreading. Okay, to create something that can be practiced by more people when the shit hits the fan, of climate change and other things that are coming down the pike, and we need to cooperate. And this is partly what the Morin Academy is about, is creating models and ideas for surviving and cooperating under those kinds of conditions for Christians and beyond. We can't be content with those. Neither do we have to obsess about them, but we need to create structures where everybody feels welcome. All of these movements mix conservative and progressive or social justice values. And I think we need to look at that. I think part of that tradition that's really useful is this part, because in our world today, we tend to create, we bifurcate. We say, you're on the red side or the blue side. And people don't even know what a conservative means anymore in the conservative movement in America. They don't even understand what it means. So right there, we have some ignorance. And then beyond that, they are treated as though they're mutually exclusive. The romantic reaction to the Industrial Revolution and the arts and crafts movement shows a way, and I think this is why McCarraher is so interested in them, shows a way in which true conservative and progressive values can be melded together, where we can find agreement and common ground. So my final conclusion is we can't use any of these utopian Christian communities as blueprints for future communities. We can use them for information and some inspiration, but we need to find a way that fits with our times just as people always have. And we'll be looking at the Catholic worker movement next. We'll zero in on this movement, which arguably fits with the times and is striving not to be hierarchical or homogenous, is flexible, or at least more flexible. And it doesn't have that homespun dowdy feel. It has kind of a gritty feel. So we'll dive into that next week.
Your mention of progressive and social justice oriented is a necessary trait, but is that something that applies to the Bruderhof, in your opinion?
It is, yeah. Like they have very traditionalist values, some of which I'm not comfortable with, but like some of them are also worth considering. At the same time, they publish Plow magazine, and so you see in there's a lot of discomfort with capitalism, consumerism. There is concern for social justice for sure, civil rights issues, definitely pacifism. Yeah, so they do that. And I think that's part of their appeal. And it's genuine. Like if you're going to take a fairly orthodox Christian position, you would almost have to land there if you were really serious, right? Instead of like Catholics often do, the Pope brings down the latest encyclical, which is full on social justice. And Catholics love the conservative elements of the church, religion, the religious values that they teach and moral values, but they just kind of forget about the social teachings. But really, the reason why they're there is because those things go together, and to make one package that's consistent with the New Testament. And so, yes, Bruderhof tries to do that. And I find it really interesting and probably necessary not to adopt every single one of these positions, right? But to realize that people do want, to a certain extent, and do thrive with some moral order and structure. We all need to try to figure out exactly what that should be, but to leave it the way it is now, where there's no real guidance from anybody, is not helpful to anybody.